Every time you say it's a crossroad, it is a crossroad, and maybe now more than ever. Things have changed, and the European Union has to change its software. Some taboos have been broken to face the pandemic, to face the war of Russia against Ukraine, not yet to change our position with respect to the Middle East crisis, but we have to shake the system. It works too slowly to face the challenges and the speed of the world. I understand you perfectly. I understand you perfectly. We don't hear you.
Thank you so much for your intervention. Thank you so much for your intervention. Your point has been very much taken.
We heard you.
Thank you.
We heard you. Now maybe we could continue this event.
Indeed. Thank you so much. We appreciate you being here and bringing in those points. These are the points that have been made at universities all across the continent of Europe. Even EU staffers have been taking to the street with that message. So thank you so much for being with us here today. And Josep Borrell, the High Representative, has heard your message loud and clear. So thank you very much. And now we invite the High Rep to continue. Thank you so much.
I understand perfectly the concern being expressed. Just today, the International Court of Justice has issued a statement asking or ordering Israel to stop the military actions in Gaza. I'm coming from Stanford, California, and I see at this university more or less the same concern expressed by the students. And I was saying that the Europeans have to change our software, our decision-making process. It is too slow. It takes too long to take decisions. And the world is turning very quickly. First the pandemic, after the Russian aggression against Ukraine, after the dire situation in Gaza and the awful terrorist attack of Hamas that has created this extraordinary, worrisome crisis in the Middle East. We Europeans, we have been building peace among us and building a network of relationship with the rest of the world based on trade. Trade and economic relations, believing that creating interdependencies would bring everybody to a universal peace. This has not happened. By the contrary, we live in a more multipolar world, much less multilateral, with more confrontation, more challenges, and not with a big advance of democracy, neither in countries like Russia or China and many in Africa. Now we have to face a different world, a world in which our security is at stake. And we have to reduce excessive dependencies. We have to create the capacity to defend ourselves in the framework of NATO, but being able to make a stronger contribution to NATO in one hand, and to build our own capacity of defense. This was not in the program of the founding fathers. The European Union is not a military alliance, and we will not have an European army. But by the way, we have to increase our capacity to defend ourselves, and this means a lot of things that will be discussed during these elections and on the following legislature. I have a main message to pass to all of you. We need an urgent revolution in our mindset. Every European has to understand that the problems of the world will not be solved at the national state scale. We need a stronger and more united Europe, where defense and security will be key issues. Knowing that we come from different strategic cultures, that we don't understand the world in the same manner, from the Spanish to the Polish, from the Irish to the Germans. But if we want to survive in this challenging world, we have to be more united, and we have to have methods and procedures that allow us to respond quickly to the challenges of the world. I hope we will discuss about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those opening remarks. And as we've seen there, even from the voices from the audience, and by the way, we will open the floor a little bit later as well if anyone else wants to make any points or questions. But the world is in a worse place than it was this time last year when we sat on this very stage. As you get ready now to pack up and finish your mandate and leave politics, how are you feeling? Do you feel you've gotten the job done?
Well, at the beginning of my mandate, I was told at the European Parliament, are you aware that your job is an impossible job? Well, it was an impossible job since the beginning, but nobody told me that I was going to face a pandemic and 2 wars, as a minimum. Many other things has happened. And I said at the beginning of my mandate, Europe has to learn to use the language of power. Europe has to be more assertive. Don't believe that just economic relationship will bring, as I said, peace and good relations. Interdependencies has become dependencies, and dependencies are dangerous. as we have seen with the dependency on Russia, on gas, and now we see on the China dependency on critical raw materials or on everybody needed for the digital and climate transformation. We have to understand that the world is not a Kantian world, and we have to use the capacity to influence with something more than just nice words and trade relations. Have we learned it? Not yet. In order to really be able to behave as a geopolitical actor, we have to be, as I said, more united and having another software, another method of decision, which requires that not everyone can block everything at any time and blackmail or to take hostages the decision process, asking for compensation in issue that has nothing to do with the one that we are discussing. And this will require a lot of political will. For example, European citizens, every time they have been asked by the Eurobarometer, they say, and they have said some days ago, that they want a stronger defense cooperation. They want more Europe for defense and security. They have been saying that for years. But the problem is that the political will at the level of the governments, who are the ones who matters, because defense is still a competence of the nation states, it's not a competence of the Commission, it's the competence of the states, they haven't been providing the political impetus for that. Then the war came, and we wake up. But one thing is to wake up, and another thing is to step up. One thing is to wake up, not to sleep, and another thing is to go out of the bed and start working. That we still haven't done. We started. But there is a lot of work, a lot of money, a lot of political will in order to build what Europeans need today.
Indeed, as you say, mission impossible. And it was interesting, this week we saw the Weimar Triangle, a reinvigorated Weimar Triangle meet France, Germany and Poland, the foreign ministers asking, in fact, for more powers to be given to the EU's chief high rep. But Stephanie, you have a question now?
Sure, I'd like to turn, in your opening remarks you actually mentioned NATO. And I think it's fair to say that the transatlantic relationship over the decades had its good times and not so good times. And Trump might have not been really the first president pushing the Europeans to invest much more in their security policy, right? If we just think of Obama, for example, he wanted to pivot to Asia and then was always drawn back to the European theater, but he wanted to push Europeans already to invest more in their security as well. But Trump might be particular because he also questioned the entire institutional framework in which the transatlantic relationship is actually embedded. So I think it's fair to say that he almost said that NATO is obsolete. And so in his second term, while he might not leave NATO because Congress has tried to make that really difficult for him, he nonetheless might just disengage from NATO completely. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more. I mean, in the European Union, we've discussed strategic autonomy, strategic sovereignty, different terms were used, a defense industrial policy that you referred to as well. But is the EU really ready for a possible second Trump term?
Well, Trump was the ones who shake us and told us you are not spending enough in defense. And he was right. He said that in a very tough manner, but he was right. We are spending on defense overall about 1.5, 1.6 of the European GNP. Russia spends 6.5, and the US 3.5. So we are far away of the effort that is required to have our capacities in the field of defense. At the same time, I have to repeat once and again, there is not alternative to NATO for the territorial defense of Europe. Today, there is not alternative to NATO. And for a long time, we have been discussing a false dilemma. Do we need NATO or do we need strategic autonomy? We need both. Now this dilemma is being solved. We need a strong NATO a reliable NATO, and inside NATO we have to build a strong European Union pillar of defense. And for that we need to become stronger. But it is not one thing or the other. Another question is who is going to do the US in the future, depending who is at the White House. For years, we have been delegating our defense and security issues to the US. We should not continue delegating. We have to take our responsibility. And that's why, instead of talking about strategic autonomy, I prefer to talk about strategic responsibility. We have to take our responsibility in our hands. Altogether, the Europeans spend in military, before the war in Ukraine, 4 times what Russia was spending. Now it's just the contrary. And if we want to face this situation, we have to increase our capacity, not to go out of NATO, but to become stronger inside NATO. And the stronger we will be, the stronger will be the interest of the US to make the European Union and the NATO working together. So no longer a dilemma. We need both things at the same time. The question mark is what the US are going to do depending on who is going to rule.
But you have a little spanner in the works there when it comes to NATO. Just this morning, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, in an interview said that he wants to, quote, redefine Hungary's relationship with NATO in this new era of support for Ukraine. How do you deal with a troublemaker like that when you're talking here about the need for unity and a strong Europe speaking with one voice?
I don't know what does it mean by redefining the relationship with NATO. It's a quite undefined assessment. Redefine in which sense?
It means not allowing Ukraine ever to become a member of NATO. It means reducing support to Ukraine. We've seen Viktor Orban many times pushing back when it comes to joining the joint stance on sanctions against Russia, etc.
Look, the support to Ukraine was built from the beginning with a strong unity among Europeans. And thanks to this unity, we have been able to provide to Ukraine military support, financial support, humanitarian and economic support. Today, at about 90 billion euros, 90 billion euros, more than the US. More overall. Less on the military side, not negligible, but more if we add up military, civilian, economic and humanitarian. And whatever proposal comes, we have to continue doing that. Otherwise, Ukraine will not be able to resist. This 6-month delay on the US arguing in the Congress about do we support Ukraine, we don't support Ukraine, we don't support Ukraine, we support Ukraine, 6-month delay has had a high cost in terms of lives and in terms of weakness of the Ukrainians in the front line. And every time that we delay a decision, there is a bill paid in lives. So if we want Ukraine to continue defending itself, we have to continue supporting them. I know how to finish this war. I know. We stop supporting Ukraine and the war will finish in a week. But how? You will have a puppet government in Kyiv. You will have this Ukrainian society crushed by the Russian oppression. You will have the Russian troops on the Polish border. You will have Russia controlling 45% of the world market of grain. And you will have Putin saying, it worked, let's try again with someone else. So this is what I think whatever Orban or whoever says, we have to do. And what worries me is that at that moment, the unity of the Europeans starts being a little bit put into question, because not everybody wants to participate on the military support. That being said, we have to work on the diplomatic side, and we will do that on the next 14 and 15 of June in Geneva. All wars finish with a stalemate or a peace agreement. Some cases, like in the Korea case, there is not peace agreement. It's just stopping war, not peace, but not war. This is the big question for us. How do we end this war? It will depend on us, not only on the Ukrainians. And this is a message that during this electoral process, European citizens has to answer. What do they want to do? Because depending on the composition of the parliament, the answer to this question will be one or another.
And these answers might not be very easy to find. As you said yourself again in your opening remarks, you want a stronger and a more united Europe, but actually this coherence and this unity is not always easy to achieve. So, for example, when it's about taking positions on activities that are going on either in Gaza, in Georgia, or in Ukraine, actually, it's very hard to achieve agreement among EU member states. If at all, actually, sometimes one member state has to ask another member state to go on coffee break, right, as has happened between Orban and Scholz, and when they use constructive abstention. So I'd like to ask a little bit more. You said, like, qualified majority voting might be one way to actually create more coherence, but is it actually the only way to create more unity among EU member states? And maybe a little bit more provocatively, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about whether coherence and unity is always a sign of strength of the European Union. Because couldn't we also say that sometimes there's strength in disunity, especially if the European Union wants to not portray itself as it, the West, against the rest?
Yes. This is something important. We have to avoid that the world goes to a kind of a fight between the West, and we are part of the West, against the rest of the world. Finish the two blocks against each other. Finish the big hegemon. There is a multipolar world, and many countries which are very important today, and they didn't exist in the aftermath of the Second World War, wants to be actors of the geopolitical landscape, and others are hedging. They are not with you, they're not with the others. It depends on the day, it depends on the matter, and it depends on the alternative and the concrete offer that we can provide to them. And we have to avoid that the Russia vision of the world, based on the double standards of the West, look, what do you do? Ukraine is one thing, Gaza is another thing, conquers the mind of the people and creates a kind of a great coalition against the West, who at the end is practicing double standards. This is the most important battle for our geopolitical role. And for that, yes, qualified majority decision-making would help. But it's not the only thing that we need. When I'm saying that we have to change the software, it's not only the decision-making process, it's the mindset. And this will require a strong political engagement and a strong pedagogy towards European citizens. We don't share the same vision of the world. That's a fact. The position of Germany with respect to the war in Gaza is completely different than the position of Spain, for historical reasons, easy to understand. And the position against the war, with respect to the war in Iraq, is completely different from Poland to the Spain, because the historical reasons. We have to overcome that situation and create a common strategic culture, a common understanding of the world. And I know it's easy said, but we have to do it. Otherwise, we will not be a geopolitical actor. In the States, you live in Arkansas, you live in Alaska, you live in Miami, you have the same understanding of the threats. But in Europe, if you live in Vilnius or you live in Lisbon and Athens, you don't have the same understanding of the threats. And this is what the Europeans has to build, a common understanding of the world. A lot of pedagogy, a lot of political and intellectual work has to be done. And the European University Institute can contribute to it. All the universities, more debate about what is Europe about, how the world works, who is who represents whom. We have to engage in a much more intellectual and shared process, not only the government, but ordinary citizens. And This is what is missing in the European project. And
who is who, indeed? Who do you call when you want to speak to Europe? That is the question always. Who should fill your shoes then, Josep Borrell, going forward?
what, sorry?
Who should fill your shoes? Who should be the next Foreign Affairs Chief, do you think?
Who should be? I don't know. I don't know. But I wish him luck.
Or her, him?
I wish him the best success, because he has to do two different things at the same time. He has to engage with the rest of the world, and he has to engage with the European Union actors. He has to be acting outside and inside. He has to create consensus inside the European Union, not only among the states, but also between the European institutions, the Council and the Commission. And then he has to go to the rest of the world and to present a united position. And when there is not a united position, then he has to take some risk and to push, and not to be silent, but to try to present alternatives to the debate. For example, in the war in Gaza, it has been a big dividing issue among us. When we vote in the United Nations General Assembly, 18 vote in favor of the ceasefire, 2 vote against, and the others abstain. Well, it's difficult to represent the European Union position like this, because there is not a European Union position. There's a basic one, freedom of hostages, increased humanitarian support, and building of the two-state solution. But then you go to be in concrete actions, not just rhetoric declarations, but to build it. For example, let's see which is going to be the answer of the European Union to the ruling of the International Court of Justice that has been issued today. Which is going to be our position? We will have to choose between our support to the international institution and the rule of law, or our support to Israel. And both things is going to be quite difficult to make compatible.
And the EU, of course, has been accused of double standards in its handling of this situation. This is coming up day in, day out. You can see the anger across the continent among civil society, among students, and also among EU staffers. They've been writing letters as well to you, criticising the handling of the European Union here. Is this something that keeps you up at night? Because, as you say, you can't really say how you feel because you don't have that competence as the High Representative.
Certainly not. Nobody cares about my personal opinion. When I'm saying something, it's because I have the European Union behind me, otherwise, who cares? And certainly we have to clearly say that we reject and condemn the terrorist attack of Hamas. They are heinous, and I have to repeat the same thing that we have been saying, that Israel has the right to defend, certainly, but this right to defend has to be implemented in accordance with international law and international humanitarian law. And the question is, does it happen? It's not enough to say. The question is, does it happen? And if it doesn't happen, what to do? And this is something that the Europeans have to discuss more, because by the time being, we haven't been able to look for a unified position in something which is, what can I say, is dividing among us. And I cannot go further than the consensus among us, but I have to push for a consensus. On Monday, we will have in Brussels the 5 foreign affairs ministers of the most important Arab countries, from Jordan, from Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, from Emirates, from Qatar, the Arab League. And we will try to establish a dialogue between the Europeans and the Arabs in order to break this stalemate and to try to look for a solution, a political solution, because there is not a military solution to the conflict in the Middle East. It's not just by war that this will be solved. This is the 100 years war. But this political solution requires a strong engagement of the international community, starting by us. Otherwise, it will not be a solution, and we will go from funerals to funerals, generation after the generations, complaining about a situation which heart, our feeling. This is something that the Europeans have to, not the European people, but the European governments, understand and engage. I hope that on Monday the visit of the Arabs to the Brussels Foreign Affairs Council will represent a political push in this direction.
If there's anyone in the audience who'd like to pose a question, get ready. We can bring a microphone down to you. And in the meantime, Stephanie, you have a question?
Just one more brief question, which is very, very broad. Given your experience both on the national and the EU level with the foreign policy portfolio, so I mean, you were privy to a lot of information, you work in networks that also distribute lots of information. I'd just be curious, if I figuratively would give you like a crystal ball now and you would have to look into it and tell me how the world looks like in 10 years' time, what kind of world do you expect to see? And I will try to pick up on Maeve's question again. Who in the European Union will have led the EU into this direction? Because there are names obviously circulating. Some mention people more in the Baltic states, in Poland or Luxembourg. Do you see anybody who is positioning themselves already for the job?
The second question is a delicate one. I don't think I can make a positive contribution to that, mentioning one or the other. It's not my role to pick out my successor. The world in 10 years, well, the big structural issue today is the confrontation between China and US. This is the big thing. The emerging power, and I wouldn't say the decaying power, but the established power. This will define the world of tomorrow, which is the role of China with respect to US in this new geopolitical landscape. And we Europeans, we should try not to be squeezed on this confrontation. We have to take care of our interests also. We will be always closer to the US, certainly. We share the same political system, the same economic system. But on these giant confrontations, the European has to look at our own interests and take care of how things are going on. For example, if the US puts a big tariff to the imports of the electric cars from China, which, by the way, they are almost not importing electric cars from China. It is a kind of preventive tariffs. Where the Chinese cars will go? Guess where? In Europe, no? So we have to work in a coordinated manner with the US and trying to say, well, look, here we are. And then there are three trends which are accelerating and will define the world of tomorrow. The first is climate change. It's accelerating, and you cannot imagine how many climate refugees we will have coming from Sahel and sub-Saharan Africa, where hundreds of thousands of people will not be able to live because nobody will be able to live at these high temperatures. This is a trend which is accelerating, and not for tomorrow, it's for today. The second trend is the demographic one. We are becoming older and older and smaller with respect to the rest of the world. We are 5% of the world population, and our average age is twice, double, the average age of our neighbors from Gibraltar to the Caucasus. The unbalance, the demographic unbalance of the world will define a lot of conflicts. And the third one is the technological trend. We are lagging behind. The new technologies. I'm coming from Stanford, from California, visiting the big firms that they didn't exist some years ago, and now they are the biggest capitalization in the world. Technology, demography, and climate change will define the world to tomorrow. And in this world, we, Europeans, we will not represent the same thing that we represented in the past. So wake up, my dear citizens of Europe. Face these challenges, demographic one, technological one, and environmental one. And one thing, let me finish with that. When we go and we talk with the people in the third world, emerging countries, which are much lower level of development than us, and we tell them, you have to fight against climate change. They tell us, oh, we have, but you have to do it much more than us because you created the problem. You created the problem and we are suffering the consequences. And you know what? I don't have the same priorities than you, because my level of development is much lower. And you have a strong responsibility, and you have to support me in order to fight against climate change. Otherwise, I will not do, because it's not my first priority. My first priority is to give my people food for tomorrow. And this is something that we have to understand. For us, it's quite logical and natural, but we are 8% of the world emissions of CO2. Even if tomorrow the Europeans cancel all emissions, the problem will remain the same. So the important thing is our support to the others to do our policies, to follow our policies. Otherwise, the result will be damaging for our competitivity and will not solve the climate problem. And keep in mind, the demographic unbalance is playing against us. The Europeans need a lot of migrants. We need them. It has to be a regular process. It has to be under control. We have to fight against the human being smugglers. We have to fight against irregular migration. But it's utopical to believe that the European society can survive only with our demographic strength. Because reproduction, takes some procedures. And by the time being, I don't see the demographic boosts of the Europeans being able to keep our size in the world. This is something that the European societies have to understand.
Okay, a lot at stake. And a number of the topics you mentioned there, we dived into over the last 2 days over all those panels. I'm just looking around the room to see, would anyone like to pose a question to the High Representative? Yeah, we have a gentleman there. Anyone else? So we can take a couple at a time.
Try to speak loud and clear.
The acoustics.
I have a microphone.
Just introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Friedrich Puttmann from the London School of Economics, and you just mentioned the issue of refugees and migrants, and I have a question on the European neighbourhood, which is very short. How would you define the EU's relationship with Turkey these days?
Thank you so much for your question. Any other questions? Okay.
The relationship
with Turkey.
With Turkey.
Turkey, to be more politically correct. Yeah.
Turkey is a candidate country. For years, it has been, and it still is, a candidate country. But the process of adhesion has been slowing down, and now is in a stalemate situation. And frankly, when I see the last decision that has been taken, I see from the Turkish side a lot of complaints saying that we don't take them seriously into consideration, and believing that we are no longer interested in Turkey becoming a member of the European Union. That's what they believe. And it's important for the Europeans to decide what do we want to do with Turkey. We cannot continue keeping this sleeping status quo, because more and more Turkey is taking another direction, not converging with our values and rules, but looking for a decision from our side. And this decision has not come, and they complain, and they regularly complain when they say, look, you exclude the Turkish companies from the Ukrainian reconstruction fund, or you don't invite us to the meetings where you invite other candidates. This kind of relationship, which is ni fu ni fa, is not, I consider you seriously a candidate, but I don't abandon it. It's something that is unsustainable. And in the next legislature, the responsibles and the European Union Council, the leaders, will have to say what kind of relationship do we want to have with Turkey.
And just briefly on EU enlargement, on Georgia. Is Georgia's future in the European Union, given their recent foreign agents bill?
Well, we are strongly concerned by this law of foreign agents. And this certainly doesn't make Georgia to be on the European path. And we have been telling them, on the other hand, we have to be very careful not to hurt their nationalist feeling. This is something in which we have to use a soft language and at the same time a clear position with respect what is compatible and what is not with the European path. On Georgia, with respect to this move, but there are other countries who are not aligning with the foreign policy of the European Union. Serbia, for example, it's a very low rate of alignment with the foreign policy of the European Union. And this is something that has to be also remarked. If you want to be a member of the European Union, you have to align on the rule of law, on the freedom, and on the foreign policy positions.
Okay. We have more questions, but we're out of time. I don't know if we're allowed to steal another 2 minutes. I think we are. No? Just one.
Jean-Michel Gréchamp, Florence School of Regulation, EUI. Mr. Borrell, 3 European countries moved to recognize Palestine as a legitimate state. Will this accelerate the repositioning of the EU, or is this repositioning depending much more on other countries like, say, Germany and Czech Republic?
Thank you so much for your question. And the lady there, and then you give a short conclusion.
Hello. Just continuing on enlargement topic, and you mentioned Serbia, which has not aligned with the common foreign and security policy fully. But at the same time, we know that the Serbian government is actually both in terms of the values, but also in terms of its international cooperation, actually going farther and farther away from being a true EU accession candidate. So do you think that the EU is actually losing its appeal in the Western Balkans? And what will be the future of EU's enlargement policy in the Western Balkans if it loses Serbia the way it lost Turkey?
Thank you so much for your questions.
Do you have easy questions? No, I understand. It depends, mon cher Michel Gréchamp. It depends to whom you are asking. I am sure that Spain and Ireland and Slovenia and maybe tomorrow others believe honestly that recognition is a political push for the two-state solution. But I know that there are other members of the European Union who believe the contrary, that they believe that it could be counterproductive because it's not the moment. What can I do? For me, one thing is clear. Recognition is not supporting Hamas. And on that, I have to really contest the positions expressed by the Israeli government saying that recognition is a gift to Hamas or supporting terrorism. Just by the contrary. Let me be logical. The Palestinian world is divided in 2 banners. The Hamas, that we consider a terrorist organization, and the Palestinian Authority, which is the nucleus of the future possible Palestinian state, with whom we have good relationship. I will meet with the Prime Minister of Palestine on Monday in Brussels. We pay about 500 million euros per year in supporting the Palestinian Authority. They go to the United Nations. So when we recognize the Palestinian statehood, to whom are we supporting? To the Hamas branch or to the Palestinian Authority branch? Certainly to the Palestinian Authority branch, no? So it's a good way, it's a good position. It's unfunded, completely unfunded and unacceptable to say that recognition, be or not counterproductive, is a matter of giving gifts to Hamas or expressing anti-Semitism. Nothing of that. It's a political decision that someone believes that this is going to push for the two-state solution. This is not the common understanding of the European Union, and we will have to continue discussing about that. And on Serbia, it's clear that there is not an alignment in the foreign policy of Serbia with respect to Russia and respect to China. And the recent visit of President Xi to Serbia shows it clearly. But you can tell me that the same thing can be said about the visit of President Xi to Hungary, exactly in the same terms. The difference is Hungary is inside the European Union and Serbia is not in the European Union. But the position with respect to China is more or less the same thing and quite divergent with respect to the general policy of the European Union. And you know what? The process of enlargement was a long queue towards stalled, blocked, paralyzed for years and years. And suddenly, a big country appears by the end of the queue, Ukraine. And now this is pushing, and pushing hard. So either Ukraine jumps above the queue, which is difficult to believe and justify, or Ukraine will be pushing the whole queue and accelerating the process in one direction or the other. So next legislature will be the moment of truth with respect to our position towards the enlargement, just because there is a big one pushing on the end of the queue and making the queue to move, and either the queue moves or the queue will be broken.
Thank you so much, Josep Borrell. You've been so generous with your time. A round of applause there for the High Representative.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much to Stephanie Hoffman there, Professor Stephanie Hoffman from the EUI as well. So that brings this opening ceremony of the State of the Union Part 2 to an end. Now we will have parallel sessions, so I think you should know which one you are registered for. If you are registered for the session that includes Nadia Calvino, from the President of the EIB, that will be moderated by the Financial Times journalist Polita Clark, then you can stay exactly where you are. You are in the right place. Otherwise, if you're registered for the digital public infrastructure, you need to go to the Sala Lorenzo il Magnifico. Enjoy the panels and see you later.